it's okay to throw it in the trash can because it is trash.
Yeah.
It is inherently material.
Right.
Cows, by the way, are the silent jury in the trial of mankind.
Okay.
It's amazing.
Welcome to Machinae Ex Deo, the show where we're not interested in building deities and all-powerful things out of the machine world, things that will just fall apart like the Tower of Babel and return to the dust of the earth. Instead, we're interested in building machines that will reflect the uncreated divine logos. Here, we're building up the machines of God. You hear in the zeitgeist, the air we breathe, that technology is getting ingrained in everything. We aren't really pausing to ask, wait, is what we're building in alignment with God's intentions for mankind? We're using theology here, philosophy, life experience, both from the field and the mundane day-to-day life to figure out what machines, what technology does God want us to make? Today's show, we're looking at how technology interacts with labor, automation, assembly lines, Uber, gig economy. Silicon Valley prides itself on how disruptive it is. But do we want to be disrupted? Or do we need to go further yet to fully automated space capitalism? To help us out, before we started, we read through John Paul II's beautiful encyclical Laborum Exercens to help guide us. JP2 is quite clear that not only is labor an essential aspect of the human experience, but man is the proper subject of work. Work, in the abstract form, is made for man. The ultimate purpose is not just material goods. Man is to subdue the earth and dominate it because he is made in the image of God. It makes sense then too that we would develop technologies which leave a mark in the process. Issues arrive though when on a mass scale we supplant human labor and take man out of the equation of creation. When we take a purely materialistic viewpoint which only considers man's role as consumer rather than his role as producer, a divinely ordained one at that. A co-creator with God. To help us understand the issue a little bit better, we've got a bunch of fellow Catholics on to discuss. Some of us work in tech and some don't because we want to avoid this becoming a technocratic discourse. It'll vary week to week who's on exactly, so keep up with that, but we're hoping that this will be fruitful. If it is, let us know, share the pod. I'm your host, Thad. I do mechanical engineering, although I come from a farm background, and there's of course a lot more, but it'll all coming out in time.
I am Nathaniel. I am a software engineer with some mechanical background, and I also work with technology.
My name's Jackson. I'm currently working as a systems engineer, though my degree is in cybersecurity, at least the one that got me that job. My original studies were in history and German, so I have a lot of weird random stuff bouncing around in my head.
I'm John, or Jonathan. I'm a DIY punk rocker. As a 40-hour week hobby, though, I work in a warehouse doing pallets, liquor stuff, liquor warehouse.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very relevant.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah. It actually kind of is. I mean, the warehouse.
It really is. And that's one of the big things we're trying to do here, is trying to keep this from being just like some crazy technocrat thing. Where
we have
we're
one more person.
Yeah, I know.
Anyways.
Hi, David.
Hey, I'm David. I'm a software engineer working in the defense industry. I'm originally from the Chicago area, so I've only been in New Hampshire for a couple years, and look forward to being part of this podcast.
I'm the only person in this room that's not an engineer.
Yet.
Yes, yet.
Yeah.
We have guests that will be coming on.
Or some people like to say, I kind of believe it. Everybody's some sort of engineer. It's just a question of what type.
Yeah,
True.
I've thought that too, yeah.
Everybody's an artist. Everybody's an engineer. Everybody's a priest, prophet, and king. Yada, yada.
Yeah.
The father of a friend of mine once reworked his title when he was landscaping younger to be like a hydro something engineer. It's like he watered the plants.
Hydroponics engineer.
Something like that. It wasn't exactly hydroponics because it wasn't for food. Obviously,
He was
just a landscaper, but he phrased it in such a way that he could put engineer on it. I forget what it was. If you think hard enough, you can turn anything into engineering, especially the way we use it now.
Janitorial
sales
engineer.
You're a salesman.
You're a social engineer.
Yeah.
Makes you sound legit.
That too.
If you do personal fitness, you're a shape engineer, technically.
Yeah.
In a way.
Biochemical engineer.
Well, that's kind of relevant to what we're talking about today, because what we're talking about today is labor. And how that interacts with technology. So, kind of how everything is. Anytime we actually structure our work and systematize it, we're engineering in a way. When we take craft and practical arts and systematize it, create a logos to it, that's techne, which is craft, and the logos, we're organizing, structuring, talking about it. That is technology. Even if that's something benign like setting up a workshop, technology is just so intertwined with work and economics. It's going to be unavoidable to not talk about economics if we're really taking a holistic approach and actually looking at everything rather than just being way too down in the weeds on the technical nitty-gritty, which is what we're trying not to do here. We're trying to actually look at the big picture of, like, are we building things that glorify God? And so primal question we're looking at today is, like, what's the proper role of technology with respect to labor? And we're going to go to John Paul II's most wonderful encyclical, Laborem Exercens, here. We all read it ahead of time. We haven't really discussed it much. We're going to go through that a little bit, but mostly just use that as a jumping off point. I've talked enough. So anyone else have some interesting ideas that stood out to them with this?
The first thing I want to comment on for the audience's sake, so they don't have to go and read it themselves in order to understand what we're talking about. Some of what, I guess, the definition of work that is put forth here, because that's going to tie into how technology is used. Is what is it doing? What is it being used for? Well, it's for work, and what is work? Work is when man is exercising his dominant role over nature, and that involves necessarily toil, and that can be both physical and intellectual. So to tie it into our technology theme for today, the physical technology is much easier to think of, where a shovel or a backhoe allows a person to dig much faster, much more precise than they would with just his hands. Similarly, everyone's favorite app on their phone, the calculator, allows you to do all the math you ever want to with much greater speed and precision. So we have technology filling in both of those roles of work and making things easier and more efficient.
This reminds me, interestingly, of a thought I had and I totally forgot what this method was called. If anyone knew it, I think it'd be UTHAT, but it was, you might not, I don't know.
Go ahead.
But it was the way that, like, sailors would navigate is they used to have a rope with, like, knots tied every foot or so. And they would,
I forget what it's called.
as they would look at the map and then they would, like, measure the time of, like, each.
So that's
like,
how they measured their speed. That's why ships today are still use their speed in knots.
Knots.
Speed, but
Even though they're
it
using
was also
nuclear
part of
power
how they
half
could
the
tell where they would take the speed and then say, given that we left here roughly this time.
Yep.
And
On this
we're heading,
heading.
yeah.
Yep.
So, but it's interesting because then I think about it. If I'm driving a boat across the ocean, or if I'm like the captain of like a cruise ship, and I'm using a GPS to direct me, the brain that basically composes that creates that GPS is going to have to be able to do the labor of what those sailors used to have to do. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
That you have to basically to be able to do that math. You might not have to do it as quickly, but you would have to do that same math. And so, in a sense, that labor hasn't really gone away in some respects.
Right. The labor that was put into creating said technology is now being used to enhance the work of future users of said technology.
Mm-hmm.
It intertwines in a nice way like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes it way more efficient too. I mean, for example, with GPS, I mean, it's like less effort. You're more accurate.
You don't have to burn your eyes staring at the sun
Yeah,
through a sextant.
It allows
Yeah.
you to focus your brain power on other things and be more efficient.
Like
in that
not
way.
hitting icebergs.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It also contributes to the idea that part of work is study, like working of the mind, as opposed to what Jackson was saying about the working of the physical entities of work and labor. Working of the mind, those tools and whatnot, they kind of enable or at least make the learning process for new knowledge to be obtained that much easier to then make other tools. It's almost cyclical in a manner of speaking.
It always reminds me too of remember elementary school. I think my librarian had a teach saying, "Work smarter, not harder." So if you have technological resources that allow you to do your job easier, if you're keeping an accounting book at a restaurant, instead of doing it all by hand, there's applications out there like QuickBooks and things like that allow you to do the exact same thing, just more accurately, just wasting less time, so you can work in other areas to improve your restaurant or something like that. So it's good having a medium there.
That's actually something that we have in this encyclical. So I'll just read the quote here. This is, again, from Laborum Exercens. Quote, "The development of industry in the various sectors connected with it, even the most modern electronics technology, and especially in the fields of miniaturization, communications, and telecommunications, and so forth, shows how vast is the role of technology, that ally of work that human thought has produced, and the interaction between the subject and object of work, understood in this case not as a capacity or aptitude for work, rather as a whole set of instruments which man uses as work. Technology is undoubtedly man's ally. It facilitates his work, perfects, accelerates, and augments it. It leads to an increase in the quantity of things produced by work, and in many cases improves their quality. However, it is also a fact that in some instances, technology can cease to be man's ally and become almost his enemy, as when the mechanization of work supplants him, taking away all personal satisfaction and the incentive to creativity and responsibility. When it deprives vast quantities of workers of their previous employment, or when, through exalting the machine, it reduces man to the status of its slave instead."
First thing that comes to mind there is like Tesla and their car factories. There's so much of it is robotic and stuff like that you kind of lose the need for actual labor there. But obviously, there's still, you need the human aspect, and it's not completely replaced, but there's, especially like manufacturing, I feel like that's where that replacement of the human need there is kind of a problem, and you lose manufacturing jobs like that. So it's a negative.
This is where I get a little bit. It's interesting to me because when we talk about automation and people are like, oh, the machines are going to take all the jobs. Well, who makes the machines? And they'll say other machines, and who makes those machines? You can't eliminate the need for manpower. At some point, I think what I would postulate is that what it can do is it would limit employment to basically three basic classes, which would be the engineers that design the machines, the people who maintain them, and then the people that sort of create the parts and such. But the point is that if we reached that point, just the same way that you can purchase things in bulk and lower the price, you can kind of purchase labor in bulk. If we reached that point, the labor that was taken on by the machines, while it couldn't replace manpower entirely, we'd be looking. Think about it. In a sense, automation is just a continuation of what we've already seen in terms of technology. The fact we now have 40-hour work weeks was not absolutely impossible. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, that was absolutely impossible to have 40-hour work weeks for at least as many people as have that 40-hour work week now. So automation, could bring it even down to 20 or 30, presumably because the machines take on some of the labor. The input and output ratio is greater, so that what we get out of the machines is that much greater than what we put into it. Now, whether that would be good for the human person is difficult to tell. This is where I think we also hit the other thing that we've kind of touched on, which is, on the one hand, prosperity breeds atheism. Prosperity breeds complacency and indolence. On the other hand,
go on.
On the other hand, you need technological advancements for things like vaccines and things like, for medical advancements and, life-saving treatments and all those things. So it's a double-edged sword, technology. There's
something I want to comment on with that, saying automation is the continuation of what we've already seen. I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I remember when I was studying history, one of my professors brought up the question of what is technology and why does it only seem to start in Europe after the Black Plague?
Interesting. Okay, go on.
And the reason that was given, and one that I find fairly convincing, is that technology is a labor-saving device.
Yes.
2/3 of all of your peasants are dead. You no longer have enough people to actually feed everyone. now you can't rely on the simple tools everyone can find or make with just their hands. You need to start coming up with ways so that one person can now do more work in the same amount of time.
Right.
Or you're going to starve to death. And that's why we see the agricultural revolution hit first. All these different things that happen after
Those
the Black
methods would
Plague.
carry over to other industries.
Yep.
That makes sense.
And then we're getting to the part where we can automate so much, where we can control so much without being present. That, and I think the encyclical mentions this when they're saying plants or places in certain sections, is we're getting away from labor-saving devices and going to labor-replacing devices. So it's not one person can do more work, it's let's remove the person from the work.
But is the difference between that sort of artificial, though? I mean, it
It's-
seems that the labor-saving and a labor replacing device are kind of the same thing. in a sense.
It's more like the my first gut reaction to this portion of the encyclical was the value placed on the work done. Like if let's say, so computers is an excellent example here. Computers in general are evolving so fast that they can do so many things. In some regards, are seen as not a deity per se, but they are escalated in value as opposed to the people who are doing said work. And there might be a correlation there with people being replaced by the work, not necessarily because that saves work, but some of the reason for that could be because there is an elevated weight placed on it, possibly.
Yeah, and I think just the one limitation, though, with machines replacing people out there is, I think machines now are really, they excel at like really repetitive tasks, like the same thing over and over again. I think what needs to advance further for this to be really a problem is, with the rise of artificial intelligence, to make that like decision making in the moment, because that is making strides, every day this time around. But I don't think that's nearly as prevalent as it needs to be for like our whole work areas to be placed and stuff like that. But I think that is going to just continue to advance really fast. I see it in work too. It's like, artificial intelligence, that's like the thing to study,
This is their
computer science related. So once artificial intelligence can make, if they're in a something that you need to make a decision, like look at something and decide what to do, and variable situations, once that gets to a point where it can be kind of everywhere, then that's, when replacement's really going to
So it's an excellent point. So this is about a couple of days ago, actually. I was learning about a new artificial intelligence powered technology. I believe it's called DALL-E. Yes.
Oh, that thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This is really interesting. So it's basically, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's essentially a piece of software that specializes in taking a text input from a user to describe an image and will try its best to reproduce that image based on the description given. It's really interesting because the first thing that I thought of when I was looking at this new technology was, one, it is in fact very, very interesting. But one thing that it can do, it's a interesting piece of software. It can be used to do many good things, but there's also a worry of things like, well, what happens to like digital artists, let's say, as opposed to could this replace the creativity and be like, oh, instead of going to someone to say, I like how your artwork, I like how you portray the emotions, the ideas, the concepts in your work, could you make XYZ for me? As opposed to going to your laptop and saying, could you make this for me?
I think the thing you also have to worry about too is, I follow a couple of tech YouTubers, they've been talking about this thing a lot, giving it crazy sentences like a goat in the style of Mona Lisa holding an iPhone or something crazy like that, and it'll spit out 10 different things, and it's amazing the decisions it makes in terms of like the background, how it fits. Like it looks like somebody actually sat there for a few hours and did it. But I think also the thing you think about when you talk about that technology, what's so cool is, I know when like the whole deep fakes thing was a thing a few years ago, like the bad things you could make, the violence you could show there, you could make people seem like they're doing something that's not really doing it. So all these advances are super cool. You always got to be mindful of like the people taking advantage of the system. I know like Dollar, for example, they don't allow people to do like anything speaking violence or like racism,
They
stuff
have,
like that.
they
You
have
know,
rules around it,
so
yeah.
that's the thing. Like, while it's so niche right now, you know, as that expands and becomes more prevalent, there's the more greater chance of people kind of like abusing that sort of thing. But
So
What?
on the intellectual side, yeah, with that kind of design, the AI is a little bit more new, but we've had functional self-driving cars for a number of years now, and people keep talking about self-driving trucks to handle logistics, at least especially in the United States, where trains can only take you so far, and you need to get trucks to basically all of your gas stations and all of your grocery stores, right? And so on the physical end, I mean, that was the big idea for me of a job that might, in not so far in the future, have to struggle with, are truckers going to get replaced by self-driving trucks? And should that be allowed to happen even if the technology is functional? Because these things don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be the best. They don't have to create the new Mona Lisa, the next Wagner work. They just have to get in less accidents than humans do. And then when efficiency is the ultimate drive, then that'll be enough for a business to say, this will save us, half a penny every day for the next 100 years. We're going to do it.
I think that is much more realistic of being a problem sooner, because there's so many electric cars right now out there. Like, I know anytime you see a Tesla driving around, it's constantly taking data and improving its self-driving algorithm. And, I feel like you see Tesla cars all the time now. I mean, so your situation exactly that's much more like going to be a problem in terms of replacement than fancy computers that can draw cool images. So I think that's much more practical and right around the corner.
So one of the things we're beating around the bush here, which is, why is this a problem? Like, is this a problem because we're worried about people won't be able to make a living and we're going to have like this economic underclass, or is it that, but even more so, a spiritual problem where we're actually denying a bit of human nature? So again, going a little bit back to this encyclical, I'm quoting here. This leads immediately to a very important conclusion of an ethical nature. However true may be that man is destined for work and called to it, in the first place, work is for man and not man for work. Through this conclusion, one rightly comes to recognize the preeminence of the subjective meaning of work over the objective. It is always man who is the purpose of the work, whatever work it is that is done by man, even if the common scale of values rates it as the merest service, as the most monotonous, even the most alienating work. And there's another bit, this reminded me of it when we're talking about automation lines. So back when Henry Ford was first putting in assembly lines, this is actually from Shop Class of Soulcraft, and he's citing a couple other books here, but when Henry Ford introduced the assembly line in 1913, workers simply walked out. One of Ford's biographers wrote, "So great was labor's distaste for the new machine system that towards the close of 1913, every time the company wanted to add 100 men to its factory, it was necessary to hire 963. People just hated that automation structure of work. And when Ford talks about, it was so great, I was able to hire people, I was able to pay people higher wages, that's actually not quite the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation was more that he had to pay people higher compensatory wages because there was something about the quality of the work that just was not satisfying people. People didn't want to work that way. There's something spiritual about it, more so than just merely we're not giving people... It's not just about unemployment number. There's something about work itself that is important.
It feels like the balance between the work as fulfilling a person versus the monetary or material reward of said work, where it's like a lot of this reminds me of how some companies value the monetary output of said work or material output of said work more than the fact that the work itself is fulfilling to do, since that is what we are designed to do. Heck, in the book of Genesis, they talk about God commands Adam and Eve to have their dominion on the earth. It's part of our purpose is to work. So some of this reminds me of when the purpose of work is no longer the person, when the purpose of work is for either just for efficiency, just for monetary reward, just for material gain or whatnot, then we hit an imbalance, and that's where a lot of these issues arise.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I feel like what everybody should be striving for, like, in a career, something that you're, like, really enjoy doing, you're passionate about, and let's say, like, you're an artist or something like that, graphic designer for a YouTube channel or something like that, and then, you know, you're really into drawing, creating beautiful pieces of art, sharing with people, giving people joy from seeing that, but then all on this computer comes along and just, you know, replaces you, essentially. You're kind of, like, left without that passion, and then how do you express yourself in that way? It's like you lose that form to do it. So I think...
And how do you square it, especially because we have such a view of it's about the output of my work and it's all about what the market value is. And so if you're really viewing it from that lens, and I don't know, is it about that? Is it about how we view the value of work that's a little bit wrong?
We could be too accustomed. That is a potential. Accustomed to the... Yeah, that's a really good question, actually.
I mean, I think that everything has to have a monetary value to it, and I guess that kind of stinks because, you know, there's some careers out there where, you know, you might really, really like doing it, but you're not going to make enough money to make a living or things like that. So I think there's always, it's like that, putting our society being so focused on, you know, money this, money that, you know, make enough to pay rent and do all this sort of thing, that kind of pushes people away from some careers that, you know, really fulfill that kind of desire. So it kind of stinks that, like, that is a barrier. And that's a you know, question and discussion we have to have, like, finding that sort of balance. But
it seems almost this reminds me. So there were some classmates of mine that I went to school with that, and I know a lot of people do this, but they picked their degree based on the estimated money they would take in every year, as opposed to what they either enjoy or in fact might be called for. Where that's almost like a vocational question, where it's like, what role does God want me to play in the world, effectively, as opposed to saying, I am going to choose my role based on some worldly gain with no regard for what I might be called to do, I suppose.
I think this is also where we hit, like, the fact, from a material perspective, there's no such thing as freedom. Because, I mean, you think about it, like, because there is a practical element, though, too, because there's this, like, oh, well, I don't want, you know, like, I'm not just going to do what's going to make loads of money. I want to do what I enjoy. And true, but at some point, if you take that too far, it becomes like a Don Quixote mission. Because, I mean, dude, you have to make money. Like, you have to live. And so you do have to be kind of practical. Because so what that means then is, as a being, materially, you are essentially not free. Right? You never were. It's never been the case that humans have, in that respect, been free.
Right, but reducing it to money is different from that. That's not.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's not what makes you not free. It's that you need food, and you need water, and you need to not freeze to death. Right? Like, those are the things that you need that will drive you to do whatever to remove the threat of not having those things.
Right.
And money is the medium of
exchange.
exchange.
I agree that
ideally.
money shouldn't be like the it's
Money's
not
not what controls you. At least not in a overall state. There's plenty of people controlled by money. Don't get me wrong. But the reason why you were never free is because entropy is a thing, and you will get hungry, and you will need to do something.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And you will need to do something,
that
and is typically work,
right,
in order to prove that, hey, proof's not the right word, but in order to do something of value so that you can get food and water in return for
right. No, that's exactly my point, which is that we're beings of physical limitations.
Yeah.
So there's an element of, like, at some point things have a nature, and at some point, like, if you take it, you know, the idea of, like, what I'm called to do to an extreme extent, if you sort of ignore the material nature, then what ends up happening is it ends up becoming like I knew this would happen.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
It's all right.
Whatever. Yeah, I lost my train of thought. We can progress anyway. We'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
so I was.
Or it'll come back to me
Yeah.
at some point or
All
something.
right,
Yeah.
I can jump on something then with the assembly line needing like 9 times as many people starting as will actually stay to work the assembly line. I think that actually ties into the encyclical reiterating a couple of times as the process of work is where man is the one who is dominating. It is you are exercising control. You are changing the world in some way. And when you're on an assembly line, the part you don't have control over what you're doing. Someone already decided that for you. 2, you're doing one thing and you never get to see the finished product. And I think that, especially the finished product, is very important when you're doing something that, like, in Ford's example, building a car. Right, the people who love building cars the most are doing their custom jobs, and once it's finished, you can't get them to stop talking about it.
So with the assembly line things, so actually, I think this actually corroborates what I was saying earlier, which is that he had to pay them more because the work was more monotonous. So in other words, the input to out, so they
Or for
that's
many
a double
reasons.
that's a double win for them because they're now in a society in which the input to output ratio has increased, the output's more, less input, and they're paid more. That's going to translate into a net societal gain of material goods that are cheaper.
If you're in a purely materialistic view, though.
Well, but I'm not saying it is purely materialistic. I'm just simply saying that we are, to the extent that we are materialistic, that is the reality. And I'm not saying, I mean, think about it. Why should we presuppose, though, that there couldn't be a spiritual value in that work? Maybe God is calling them to do that work. And maybe that's their... So, because I don't think you can... I don't... In a sense, I mean, that is kind of the... So this is where it gets weird, because I feel like with capitalism, a lot of people say that it's sort of like... They take a strictly, like, egoist view of it, of like, oh, we only ever do things out of self-interest. I don't think that's true, but I think that the best we can do in the fallen state is create a system in which, whether or not the action is done out of self-interest, there is a material gain, because the material gain is not a material gain not just for one person or a small party of people, but a material gain for society on the whole. Because at some point, spiritual gain is going to essentially, well, I would say essentially manifest material, and that's not an echo of like prosperity gospel, but it's that, again, we're material
Sounds pretty
creatures.
close.
So insofar as we are material creatures, things have an order, things have a design, right? And so there's the input to output ratio.
But if it's
I
just
should
about
have taken 2
ratios.
Adderall. It's not just about ratios, but the ratios can't be ignored or dismissed as a bad thing. They are a good thing. It's just they're not the whole of the good. They're just part of it.
That's exactly it.
Yes,
So
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
exactly what we're saying with how it's about man subduing the earth. So if your subduction is purely about just getting a car and being able to do a thing, that's great and all. But the highest form of subduction of the earth and actual conquering of it is expressed by God in the creation of the world. And actually that creative aspect, we're generating a new design, getting the design out of it. And when you shove it to the factory line, you take that aspect out of it. You're stripping out the opportunities for the subduing of the earth by going to an assembly line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and think of keeping with the car example. Think of the number of times that you are taking something from the earth and either, stripping it out of the earth and then changing its form throughout the process of building a car. Whether it's raw iron, melting it down so it's becomes pure, so it becomes a steel. So you're changing where it is, you're changing its form, and then by the time you get to assembly line, everything's already made into little nuts and bolts, and there's no
So I guess
Legos.
maybe here
They're fun when you're a kid, but
I might phrase it this way. What's the alternative? So Ford has to pay people more, and he has now created a world where, now with the conveyor belt, or the assembly line, it has consolidated input and output. So you're in a society now where the output is greater than the input, much more than it was before, which is going to increase the standard of living, and they're getting paid more. Okay, so what's the alternative? The alternative is, I want to get paid more, but I want a job that has variety. is that possible? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I am saying it's impossible. Like, at some point it's possible, then at some point it isn't. You know what I'm saying?
This is not at all answering your question, but I feel like it's related, so I'm going to say it. So, who here's worked on or worked closely with people on an assembly line?
I have not worked on this.
Well, you've loaded trucks, and you've
but
worked
we
in
didn't-
factory settings where you use technology, right?
Yeah, well, okay, so yes, because they did have the totes had an assembly line where
And so, how many times did things not go quite right?
I mean, a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is one thing I do want to just point out is that people often think that assembly lines are just perfect, and we're even kind of in the back of our minds we're thinking of that as we speak right here. But there's very many cases where things don't quite go right. There still is some amount of creativity that's required. Working a factory floor. I've in fact sometimes I bite you in the up, but because I've worked in engineering while we're supporting a manufacturing line, and many cases where you go out and it's like, well, why are we having this particular problem with this thing, and like a brake pedal system on a car, and you go talk to people and it's like, well, actually because they weren't following the standard operating procedure. But the reason for that was actually because the standard operating procedure was bullshit. It was completely I went through and I tried to follow it, and it's like, this doesn't work at all. I don't blame them for trying to come up with something different and exercise a little bit of creativity. And so you said there was 3 things that going towards a manufacturer or a highly mechanized society would be, and that was designing things, maintaining them, and actually going about and building them.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly. There seems like there's still bits in there. Those 3 all exercise some. The first 2, the designing and the maintaining, more so than the building, they exercise creativity.
We can also think about this of come with me on this journey. I have a theoretical
Go.
idea. Okay. If you think about, let's say, building a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to hear of a person who not only builds the pieces for said car. Let's say you're doing a custom job using the car example. The pieces have to come from somewhere. The bolts have to be manufactured by something or someone. You could just as easily use the technology that we have developed to for those particular jobs, like molding the screws, because that also doesn't have that much creativity, but it does have an assembly line feel, and have the technology do that and leave the creative to the person. Because I know there's a lot of people who find much fulfillment in creative industries, like doing custom cars, doing music is another great one, where you're having a more of a holistic dominion, in this case, of the world in the work that you do. So we could be using the technology to take place of those tasks that do not reflect dominion, I suppose.
What I think I'm hearing, although I'm not sure if I'm hearing it, why should we attack the monotony of the job and presume that has anything to do with the meaning that can be found in it? And I guess what I'm saying is, here's what I'm saying. I think ultimately, the vast majority of jobs have, for the most of human history, been pretty monotonous. And you can't get rid of that because we live in a material world, and you have to eat, and you have to drink, and you have to poop and sleep and all that stuff. And so you have these exigencies, you have these needs. What that's going to result in is some kind of monotony that somebody has to do. And what you really think of pretty much any job, they're pretty much all monotonous.
I guess
if you can actually see patterns in pretty much any job, and it's supply and demand. Mm-hmm. All jobs are essentially supply and demand. And sure, there's more creativity in some jobs than in others, but really you break it down, that is the material half that can't be ignored, is the monotony. The monotony doesn't take away from the meaning, and it's not the end-all be-all. And I'm not saying that the material gain from it or whatever is the end-all be-all. Mm-hmm. I'm just simply saying that it is trying to sort of overthrow it would only result in peril. That's pretty much, I think, the Marxist idea, is like this universe where like they can have like a job where there's like variety and no monotony, and it's not super physical, and it requires no brain work, and it requires and they get paid really well, and they don't have to worry about anything ever.
It's not necessarily,
not that they say that explicitly, but that's implicitly what they're.
I guess it's not so much monotony. Like let's say, to give another example, if we go back to agriculture, there is a form of monotony, so to speak, in agriculture, in that you have to work around the seasons. There's an order which you plant your crops, harvest your crops, and whatnot. Yeah. But despite the monotony, there is still a creative aspect and fulfilling aspect to that. I suppose what I'm trying to tackle is more of the extremely niche. I don't know, maybe someone is fulfilled by molding nuts and bolts. I do not know. But I feel that there are some tasks that we can utilize, and we do. We utilize technology to get rid of the monotony. So I'm not saying that there isn't monotony in the jobs. I think I'm aiming towards a lack of creativity. Because you can have a monotonous job that still thrives off creativity, I suppose I'm saying.
I think creativity is not the only aspect, though.
That's true.
Because, so we talked about both the fact that, okay, you're making the job more rote, but also you're removing the person from the actual fruit of the labor. Like, you don't see every single car that you put the brake calipers on. You see maybe one or two. It just doesn't feel the same. Changing gears a little bit. When we talk about roteness, the thing that comes to my mind is ritual and liturgy. Okay. Right? Yeah. We don't view those as bad things in and of themselves. In fact, as you're saying, they're very necessary to human existence. We do need those patterns. We thrive on them both spiritually and physically. We thrive on pattern and repeating the same thing over and over again, as much as we have this modernistic impulse that we want variety and novelty in every single thing that we do. It's wrong. You're right. It is wrong. So I think it becomes apparent when you both knock down the creative aspect, but then you also knock down the communal and connective aspect. Because that's a big aspect of what liturgy and ritual does, is that it's entirely serving to connect us to a thing, to connect us to the divine.
So I did notice, as during that discussion, we started at a job that allows a person to exercise dominion over the earth, and that kind of got interpreted as having creative control at some point during that job. But I wonder if that's not necessarily the right way, but maybe looking at it as a sense of autonomy rather than a sense of creativity. Trying to remember all the details, but from a book that I read not too long ago, there are a number of studies done in a number of factories and mines and whatnot to figure out, how to organize your factories, right? And what was eventually found in one particular study that the author wanted to grab onto was that a small team given autonomy becomes more efficient than a larger team being directed centrally. And that small team ends up being like 3 to 5 people given autonomy over a task is in general more efficient than a larger team being directed. And when I told that to a friend at work, actually, and he's a veteran, he was in the Navy, and he laughed and said, we call that in the military, we call that a fire team. They have autonomy, and there's typically around 4 of them, and they get a job, and they're trained in whatever their Marines, I think, would be MOS, whatever their specialty is, and they say, go do it.
You get trusted to do something.
Yes.
It's a huge source of dignity, really.
Yeah, especially when the people in charge trust that you can accomplish a task, and then actually being able to follow through and complete that task is rewarding. Yeah.
Quoting back to the encyclical, whereas he alone, independently of the work he does, ought to be treated as the effective subject of work and its true maker and creator. When you have that smaller team, you're saying that, these people are the ones who actually are doing something here. And I think there is something about the small aspect of it, too, because it's very easier to say that you have a share of it in a smaller team environment, for sure.
And that also, I think, ties back to the communal aspect you brought up for ritual and liturgy, is if you're still working in a team, even if it's a monotonous job, for me, I usually say I'm an introvert. That's been most of my life. Some people apparently nowadays are disagreeing with me. But even as an introvert, there are a lot of tasks that are become easier if there's someone around. I was talking to someone the other day, actually. He was saying he prefers to study if just someone else is in the room. It makes it easier for him.
That's true.
Which I have not experienced personally, but it was very interesting to hear where that's what he liked. If someone else is in the room, even if they don't talk to him at all, it makes it easier for him to study.
I think maybe one thing I guess this is sort of a segue, but kind of one thing, and of course obviously I can't go a session without bringing up the infamous C.G. Jung, but he mentioned in I think The Problem of the Modern Individual, he talked about how one thing was that the rejection of Christianity always led to these sort of totalitarian states, and he said that he argued this was because the people felt powerless. But he also, one of the other things he said that made people feel powerless was with kind of industrialization, people started to feel like a number. And I sort of agree, although how I see it is, that's because if you take a strictly materialist view, that's what you are. So if you take a strictly materialist view, that's your fault that you feel like a number.
I mean, who here has a job where at work they have a number identifying them as an employee?
I have an employee ID.
Yeah, I have an ID as well.
Right.
I probably do. I don't know what it is. But
So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think that necessarily has to incur some kind of serious, nihilistic depression if you feel like a number. Because if you believe in the afterlife, which is, I think that's one of the things that, like, the Marxists attack, but the point is that we don't believe that the material world is everything. Therefore, if I'm just a number here, what does that really matter?
True.
In the sense that it shouldn't depress me. If you believe that the material world is all there is, it's absolutely going to depress you. That's your fault for being wrong. So,
I don't know if I agree with that, because if I limit I'm just a number
Well,
here, if I limit the phrase I'm just a number here to I'm just a number at work,
yeah,
I can deal with that a little bit.
Yeah.
If it's I'm just a number while I'm alive,
it's kind of sad.
that's something else.
Yeah,
because
true.
then I think
that denies the whole goodness of creation.
And I will say
goodness
this
of
too.
Creation, I think that is.
Right.
I think if that were someone's true belief, I think that you can only get to that conclusion if they actually don't feel like they have any community. Because there's a lot of like mutual defining going on in the when you hang out with different groups of people. Right?
Yeah.
What's the phrase? You're made up by the people you're around.
Oh, yeah, like the 5 people you're around most is what you become. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Never heard that, but okay.
Yeah.
For all I know, a person you talk to their 5 closest friends kind of reflects that person.
I will say, though, also to what I said, that there is also, even like materially, and as Catholics, we would also believe that that there is also an element of, like, even though we believe in the afterlife and we believe that there's something more than this world, we still also would not consider it humane to reduce someone to a number, even in employment. Like, there is this element of, okay, in some respects you're a number, but you are more than that too, because you have employee rights, and you have, weekends and holidays and such, and people might argue whether or not those systems are, but the point is that we do recognize, and you have legal rights and such, and so then that means that, yeah, to some extent, sure, you're a number, but then you also are more than that too, even in employment, right? So, like,
I think the company I work at, there's thousands of employees, and building alone I work at, there's probably like 2,000 people in there. We all have, big employee IDs and have a number, I guess, but I don't feel like reduced to that at all, because I think every engineer I know is like super critical to whatever team they're on, even if they're just an operations guy, running a test or something like that, debugging it, or like some senior software engineering director or something like that. So you're like, there's so many important things that we're working on where every person, like them being there every day really matters. That even in a work sense where everybody has that sort of regulation over them, so like that. I don't feel like it limits. It's not something I like. I'm conscious of every day, being like, this is so depressing. I have I feel like everybody's really valued and for the engineering sort of work that we're doing, because there's real life impacts out there. So and even like taking the assembly line thing too. Like if you're screwing on this one bolt I mean, if you don't screw that bolt in, what if the engine could fall off? Wheel could fall off. You could crash. So like every part, while it might seem tiny, has an impact. If you just look at the bigger picture, sort of thing.
That reminds me of a story that a coworker told me, because he used to work in satellites, and they sent up this one satellite, and they were monitoring it, and it was supposed to like detach from like the rocket, sending it up into orbit at a certain time, and they see it go up, altitude goes up, and the altitude starts coming down, and they're like, why is it falling? And also it starts spinning. Like, why is it spinning? Why is it and it's supposed to have a little bit of rotation to it, but like spinning violently. And they're figuring out, how do we stabilize it? How do we get this satellite so it doesn't crash back into the Earth and like destroy New York City or something like that? And long story short, they managed to stabilize it, but they figured out what had happened was the connectors, like the fuel connectors that connected to the actual satellite to the rocket. One of the people doing the pre-flight checks saw that the hose wasn't secured right, so they had duct taped it to the satellite. So when everything else decoupled, the duct tape was still holding the satellite on to the rocket as the rocket was falling back to Earth.
That's hilarious.
So unfortunately, that's something gone wrong. But it's just one of those things of.
What about, like, are we ever going to talk
Every
about, like,
step's
technology and the stupidity of people?
Oh, I can tell you about
That
that.
would be it. That would be
Or just like the
That'd be
stuff
fun
that's
time.
like, why is this a thing? I have another, also a space thing a buddy of mine was telling me about. He works at a pretty notable agency, you know it, but...
Does it have 3 letters?
No, it does
Okay.
not.
mind.
But anyways, he's telling me about just his job. He described me his job as I glue rockets back together with tons of RTV, which is room temperature vulcanizing silicone. And he's just like, I know so much about all the different types of glue and stuff that I can glue this stuff back together with. And he's just like, I make PowerPoint presentations on like huge bullet point things on like how we're going to fix this. And it all comes down to, we're going to glue it back together.
Okay. Adhesive specialist.
I am your glue specialist.
And yeah, just there's so many things
Adhesive engineer.
that we do not recognize about the mechanized world is actually not quite as mechanized as we think it is.
I think things are getting so complex too. It just goes to show you that there's so many different parts that even a lot of minor things come together to make something a lot more big and complex. So, and the most minor things make an impact, no matter where you are, and kind of the process of putting that together and making that material.
So, I think it's interesting. I guess this is maybe kind of another segue. I guess I'm good at segues, but
Lean into it.
I noticed that one of the things with technology that becomes, and this is kind of, I think, I thought it was earlier, it touches more on what we were talking about, like at the very beginning, but one of the things is that so we're not the creator, we're sub-creators. And after a certain, in the progression of sub-creation, after a certain number of sub-creations, the sort of raw nature of things gets kind of lost. And so the footprint, the fingerprint of the creator kind of gets lost. Or I should say, if it doesn't get lost, it's harder to see. And this is kind of, again, I always have to mention Jung. But of course he talked about how the early humans, the reason that religion would have kind of just been like common sense to them, and they wouldn't have thought twice about it, was because they saw the world for what it was, which is inherently esoteric and numinous, because they were dependent on the nuances, mystical, very mystical, the nuances of things, the migration paths of animals, the ebb and flow of the tides, the interplay of the stars and the planets and the moon and sun, and all of those things would have been infinitely more vivid to them, exponentially more vivid to them, because they were dependent on the nuances of those things for their survival. So now, though, technology kind of separates us from that, because it takes, we're not dependent on those nuances for our survival. So we're not really, if you really go out in the woods and you really take time to like far out, especially the further out into nature you go, the more rural you go, the more just that you'll see everything has 1,000,001 nuances to it that you wouldn't have observed if you weren't looking for it. So I guess what I'm saying is just that technology, well, and that's partly why I think technology tends to breed atheism. It doesn't have to, it doesn't make someone become an atheist, but it is a factor that contributes to it. It makes it harder to see God, the fingerprint of God.
We're trying to get like a scientific explanation for everything. So I mean, you're
Yeah.
saying we're all cavemen and stuff. It's not like we had all the computers and stuff to come up with all these formulas describing nature and things like
Right.
that. Nowadays, it seems like every single phenomenon we're trying to explain. Oh, this is why this happens.
Yeah.
They're just explaining. Well, maybe it's
Right. Well, that's
God wanted
also
it to
the
be
wrong
that way.
question for science. This is how it happens.
Right.
In science.
You-
And why isn't necessarily in that domain.
It used to be that bishops and whatnot were great scientists because they wanted to learn about God's creation as opposed to finding an answer separate from God, which is very prevalent now. You have Scientology and all this other stuff.
Scientology is just
No.
Does
something
Scientology
else.
Yeah.
count? Does it count as anything?
I don't.
It's legally defined as a religion for tax purposes.
Anyways, sorry.
But yes, it goes back to that point where if we're relying on science, because again, it's a lot of the relying on the seen or material world for explanation as opposed to through faith or through God. So there is like the path of least resistance saying like, oh, this is not.
Well, you're also, again, you're mistaking a why and a how.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
it doesn't. This is where I'm going to sound like a pseudo philosopher for a second. There's like Aristotle's four causes, and I'm not remembering what all of them are, but basically delineating that like a thing has multiple reasons to exist. There's both how it exists materially. There's the reason why someone actually went out and ordained that material. There's the divine sort of reason for why this exists in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So you're answering a completely different question and then expecting it to be the same answer.
Right, and as I was just thinking just now, and I've thought this before, which is that why and how to some extent are interchangeable, but then to some extent they're not.
No. Yeah.
Right? So they're not infinitely interchangeable. At some
They're
point, why is a much
related.
deeper.
You
Related.
can't win Clue by answering why.
I haven't played that game in forever, so I don't
Same.
remember what it's like.
You find who did the murder in what
What
room
room,
and with what weapon.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
You can't answer. You don't win by answering why did
Colonel Mustard.
Colonel Mustard
Yeah.
kill
Oh, yes.
Miss Peacock.
with a candlestick.
The candlestick in the ballroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also two
That's-
whys. There's a why that's looking from this more historical why of
Yeah.
what are people's motivations for creating that thing, and then there's the forward-looking why of like what's the telos, what's the actual end of
So-
that particular thing,
Well, there's like
which mandates that you believe that there's actually some sort of order to it.
So, and there's, well, to be actually, there's no such thing as a philosopher that's not a pseudo philosopher. That's what it is. It's what I mean is it's DIY.
Yeah.
Philosophy is a priori,
Sure.
So therefore, it's DIY. But anyway, what I was gonna say is there's like etiological why, so like cause, like an actual sort of physical cause.
Yep.
But then there's like what is it? Teleological. That's more of like the why, like the meaning or the purpose,
Yep.
sort of why. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So, tying us a little bit back, we're talking about whys and the ability to sort of see that end goal and that numinosity and the control of God and the divine and the logos in the world.
should I define numinosity for people listening?
Numinosity, actually, you go ahead
Mysticism,
and do it.
numinosity. If it's numinous, it's the presence of a divinity, or it's spiritual, or it's mystical, or esoteric.
In a more apparent way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of, a lot of people have said this, that science has sort of disenchanted the world. In that it, again, because we have this difficulty separating out these four causes, these different whys, hows, etc., that when we see some of them actually get more material answers, we immediately say, well, all of the whys have material answers, when that's very much not the case. And what I wonder is there any way in which we conduct both scientific experiments and develop technology that we can still respect the numinous and keep it in the picture? Is there a particular way?
Yes, so that's exactly what I've thought. Yeah, and that's difficult because that's really the thing is, I mean, and I remember, See, this is where it gets interesting, because I think you have kind of like revolutionary and reactionary. And revolutionary says, well, I mean, I guess this is maybe a bastardization or something, but it's sort of that things don't have a nature and there's no design. Reactionary says the opposite, although, and where this ties in with technology is, I remember talking when I lived with those, I lived with these crazy people for a little while. They were like, very pro-transgender movement and all that, and they were socialists and such, and it was evident that what really is, and I remember when I was talking to one of them at one point, I was saying that a Kindle loses something. There's something missing in a Kindle versus a book, where the pages are more rich, it's more real, you feel the presence of something. The Kindle kind of like, what's like castrates it maybe. I don't know what the word is. It takes out the
word that comes to mind is flatten.
Exactly.
Partly because it literally does flatten it.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because the whole reason, at least in German, the way it was explained, is the why pages are in a book is because books are three-dimensional. Right? Why they use the word in as opposed to the word that means on.
That's cool.
Like the words are on a page, but the page is in the book, because the page is two-dimensional and the book is three-dimensional. And a Kindle reduces the entire book to just pages.
Huh.
Interesting.
That's a
Grammatically, that is literally what happened. Is the
That's
Kindle
pretty
has
neat.
flattened the book.
Yeah. Well, so I guess what I was saying is with like the revolutionary idea that things don't have a nature. The only, because when I was talking to my roommate at that time, and he kind of gave opposition to that idea that a Kindle is anything different to a book, but that's because, and it was just evident that it was because of the ideological presupposition you subscribed to, was that nothing really has a nature, because that's necessarily what you would have to subscribe to believe, that there was really nothing lacking in a Kindle, that a book, that there's the sort of vivid quality, the vivification or whatever the word is of the book, kind of declines with the Kindle. It's because things have a nature, and it is markedly different. It's now that it's a Kindle, it's consolidated in some fashion. I don't know what the word is, but the point is that that's kind of like the revolutionary take, I guess, on technology, is like that computers and humans are really not any different at all. That distinctions, I guess, don't exist. Even if they don't state it explicitly, it's implicit in the ideological premises that they hold. So, and that's kind of where I think but then it is a little bit bizarre, because the reactionary statement would be to say that, or what I would call objectively reactionary would be to say, not just like how the revolutionaries would see the reactionaries, but what would actually be irrational bigotry would be to say that, because this thing loses something, that means it is inherently bad or intrinsically bad. It cannot be good. It cannot be used for good. I don't think that that's true, and I don't think, because you can't erase God either. So while it is true that the fingerprint of the ultimate creator is lost after a certain series of sub-creations, it can't be erased because you can't erase God.
bingo.
So there is God, he's there. You have to look for him. How to do that is very difficult, and that is a challenge and a struggle. But the two radical stances I would say is to say, well, this technological advancement is inherently in and of itself bad. But then the other radical statement is to say that it can't be bad because there's really things don't even have a nature. And, that's just basically your rational bigotry saying that there's a distinction between what a human can do and what a computer can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we're assuming there when we say that, I think it's possible that you can develop something and increase its adherence to its nature. So
Interesting.
there's a little bit of the reactionary impulse to say that whatever we had in the past is already perfected.
Yeah.
And I think that's very difficult to say when it comes to
Right.
humanly created things like
Right.
books.
Right.
Or houses.
Or how, because ultimately it does tie back to some form that's beyond what we have on this world.
I think, the other big factor I think that plays in here, and this plays into economics, which is time, and people tend to forget time, because it's true that you can't have high quality, high speed or whatever the word is with products and commodities. You can't have...
You get it at a good price, high quality, and fast. Pick two.
Yes.
Pick two,
However, if you factor in time, that's not true, because 100 years down the line, things that today are affordable would have been only for like the richest of the rich and not even of as good quality as what middle class people have today. So when you factor time into the equation, it changes. And so suddenly you have, even cars, it's like, George Washington never had a car. George Washington never had an air conditioner. In fact, I would probably prefer to live in like community housing because it's got like clean running water than Monticello, say, because it's got clean running water and an AC. I can have an AC and a mattress. That's better than anything Thomas Jefferson ever had, And so at that time in history, so we live like kings.
Yeah.
Okay, relatively speaking. So when you factor in time, you actually can kind of have all those three things in a sense, I guess. I don't know.
No, you're just changing. You're changing the equation, but the equation doesn't change.
Well,
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
So
you're
in
still getting it slow.
You're still. I mean, honestly, if George Washington ordered an air conditioner, it takes 300 years to get to him. But at the same time, there's technologies that don't exist yet in the comparison you're making.
Yeah,
But from what's available to you, there are better air conditioners you could buy.
Yeah, no. So
Right?
you're right. Yeah, but I'm just
And
simply
that's
saying.
why the cheap one that you're getting now, you're actually
Right.
compromising on the quality, even though you can make the comparison to whatever we have now being
Right.
significantly better than even 100 years ago.
Mhm. Right, but it's so.
So in that sense, it's more like being grateful or having that
Well,
sense
that's
of context
Yes.
where, yeah, I don't like my electric bill going up and it's really loud to sit in the window there. But
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. is
I
that
have the
sense of-
option. I have the option of being cool regardless of what the temperature is outside.
The sense of gratitude is, I think, what I was mainly kind of appealing to in that sense, because there's that, what you, the technologies and the amenities you have, it just exponentially more, better than what our founders ever would have had, you think about it, like literally, like John Adams' daughter had like breast cancer and they had to cut off her breast.
That still happens.
Yeah, but now we have anesthesia. Now we have anesthesia. She didn't have anesthesia. They had her bite a stick. And she was the richest. That's the upper class.
Yeah.
People of that stature today and people of a much lower stature today, wealth-wise, in terms of, affluence and such, are able to afford anesthesia. Or at least even if there is, an insurance company involved and it takes a little bit to pay it off. Even that, because that wasn't even available at all to the Adams.
It's more the access that you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gratitude is an interesting thing. So, and going back to the assembly line a little bit, something about that destroys gratitude, I feel like.
Right.
The feeling you get of a job well done almost after you complete
Yeah,
the job.
that's true. I was thinking
job's
more of the
never done.
material good, but there is something about
Right,
the actual
right.
job itself.
Yeah, Jackson, you got a good point with the
Assembly line, the job's never done. You're always doing the same step of the job.
Well, but that's also every job. No job is ever done until you retire, I guess. And then it's still going. It's just someone else is doing it.
That's
And
true.
then-
I'm not sure if I agree with that.
There's a point on there's some.
You can shift from building something to maintaining something, and you still have work to do. But in that aspect, there's a dividing line between I'm maintaining something I've built and I have completed something I've built.
Yes.
It's like the idea of seeing the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was listening to some guys talk about job shop stuff. So, short run production of parts. They were talking about, do you prefer to make one part all the way through? Or do you prefer to do one operation on all 10 parts and then do the next operation on all 10 parts? And so many people always say, I prefer, just from pure enjoyment standpoint, to do one thing all the way through. And then actually one interesting thing you'll get from a practical standpoint that I do when I do manufacturing of that nature is I'll do one part all the way through and then I'll start batching the rest. Because that's the first time I've ever done the thing. If I do one thing all the way through, then I can make changes, and if I do make the slight modification.
One step wrong, you only did it on one of the things you're building.
Right, there's
Right,
that too.
exactly,
Yeah, there's a plethora of reasons to do it that way. So like there's a balance there. Yeah, just finishing a particular item and saying this is done, it's a huge aspect of fulfillment.
Well, one thing that also, just to give some more context, is that this expands outside of just making things. Like, the doctor.
True.
Doctor's a great example. You get to watch assuming that you're with the same patient, obviously, you get to see your patient recover and know that their quality of life has increased. Which is a great example of this, where you're seeing the fruits of your labor. You know that person is...
You've removed an illness or you've improved their health.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
So like the defense industry is kind of very different than that, though, because there's so much, like, you need security clearances to know a lot of things. There's so many projects that people work on that they have no idea what they're actually really working on, because, their bosses can't say, oh, it's just the customer, or it's just the platform, it's just this or that. So you could be on a project doing software work for a year and just really know nothing about like the bigger picture of what it's actually doing, what's its actual mission. So I guess some people could see that as kind of like unsatisfying doing that type of work. Me, I never really had that wrong, because it's eventually you get to the point where they need more people to know, what's going on to contribute in a certain way. But for me, it's like, oh, it makes it cooler that way. It's like, oh, I really, really wonder what the bigger picture of this sort of thing is. So, I mean, I'm sure that kind of work environment could rub people off and, not want to work in like a defense environment because of that. But it's kind of like a different thing than like a doctor, like you said, like a totally polar opposite, where there's so many things hidden, even from your own coworkers. Like, oh, you might be on another team down the hall from me, but you literally can't tell me anything about what you do. I can't very much what I do. It's all these really vague sort of things. So we're all contributing to something. There's all these layers of secrecy because of the nature of what it is. So there's, different engineering fields that have that compared to others. So
There's almost an aspect of faith to it.
yep, and you got to trust that what you're building for your customers is like a moral. There's like certain aspect. There's
It's good.
a lot of things in defense that it's with anything military. There's always this kind of like line you toe, and you don't know what exactly you're working on. So
I know exactly what I'm working on, but
well, I do too. But
that's me.
yeah, same here. But I don't want to get myself in trouble. So
Yeah, we don't want you to get fired.
Yeah, no.
but
So something that you, Thad, had said earlier was it seemed like sort of the question you had asked when we were talking about the creator and sub-creation, which is that the question it sounds like you kind of asked, which I was kind of thinking too, is can we use sub-creation to get back to the creator, to kind of direct us back to the creator?
Back to the creator or back to being a creator? And I think that's a very difficult. That's a line that.
Well, back to if the sub-creations sort of obnubilate, that's a good word. In other words, make to obscure. If the obnubilate means to obscure or dim.
Okay, so just say obscure.
So, yeah. So if the sub-creations, over time kind of obscure the fingerprint of the creator, is there a way, though, to continue that sort of progression of sub-creations, but in such fashion that it actually still makes, that it still, makes manifest or evident the fingerprint of the creator. So it's not exactly lost.
well, I mean, I know this kind of touches on a question that you posed earlier too. That can we bring God, the creator, back into creating things like that? And I feel like from having worked in internships and engineering when I was in school, and now I feel like that's really hard to do in our engineering workplaces, because in a lot of engineering companies, they're very left-leaning in a sense in terms of like the politics and the environment of the situation. So you have very few people, especially, I don't know, just speaking from a software point of view, who are not, that's like not top of mind. You think of like the Amazons, the Facebooks of the world, where they're paying for people to go across states to get abortions. It's like a lot of things that's like, it's not an environment where I would ever feel comfortable talking about religion or the beauty and like why things are the way they are. Because I feel like I would never even try to bring that up, because I just know certain people in technology areas are just so much away from this side of things.
I actually have not a counterpoint, but to go off what you were saying and what John was saying about bringing the creative back into the picture. At least for me, I think it comes down to like it's an appreciation of how beautifully complex the world is. One of my relatives works in biochemistry and does like T-cell reprogramming, like really high-tech, like the cancer research stuff. And it's awesome because in studying the beautiful complexity that is the human body and how cells work and whatnot, at some point, you gotta take a step back and realize, like, this is a beautiful, amazing creation, and give acknowledgement that something greater made it, which is the creator. I feel like that view on work, in a manner of speaking, can also be reflected sometimes in, let's say, software development, because mathematics as a field is a beautiful, beautiful tool, and things just work. Like, you have great examples like the Fibonacci sequence you see in nature all the time. You have the golden curve and all this other really interesting stuff that we learn about and discover, as opposed to invent, about the rules of the way the world works. And that's like a reflection of the creator. It's almost like going to a museum and seeing like the Starry Night painting or a Mona Lisa, and appreciating how beautiful the art is, and giving like credit to the person who made that artwork. In the same manner, it's just on a bigger scale.
The direction I was thinking of answering your question was more a lesson or a saying you often find in software development. I've got it right here from the Cathedral and the Bazaar, which is, plan to throw one version away, you will anyways. Which is, you always need to, whenever we design things, we suck, we're humans, we always get it wrong. We always, literally, will sin in however we're designing something. We miss the mark. Yeah. We miss the mark. Yeah. We have to, at certain points, actually take the thing, learn our lesson from it, crumple it up, and throw it in the trash can. Just get rid of it. And the other aspect of that often comes with it, too, is another principle, number 12 here, again from the Cathedral and Bazaar. Often the most striking and innovative solutions come from realizing that your concept of the problem was wrong. Yeah.
That's really good.
I'm sure we've all been there. It's like you actually, you have like this set of requirements or something, and then you interpret it one way, but then you actually go back and it's like, wait, that actually could mean this. Like, it could be bigger, or you just flatly misinterpreted what the thing was. And then that requires you to, again, crumple up whatever you did and go back and start over. It's a creative destruction that we have to partake in from time to time.
Well, I think, just to get kind of engineering on you guys.
Go.
I know it's, when you're developing software, a method that's very popular these days, or the last 15, 20 years, to design and develop software, to go through that iterative process, is like using agile software development. So, you have like 2-week sprints, and you have a daily stand-up scrum meeting, in a sense. And that whole process allows you, in doing it at 2-week periods, you have at the beginning of 2 weeks, you have a meeting to talk about what everybody's going to do, how much effort it's going to take. At the end of those 2 weeks, you kind of see where you're at and, adjust, see what you can learn from that 2 weeks. And that allows you to bring what you have to the customer and say, okay, are we heading in the right direction? Because the customer's like, oh, I want this. I want, taking some training on it. I want, a swing on a tree. And, there's so many different ways you can interpret that. If you give that to engineers, so they'll over-engineer it. They'll put a tire tied to the tree branch. They'll make like a wood little bench that you swing back and forth. There's so many different ways to interpret problems that doing this in like a frequent 2-week way of doing it allows you to kind of like course correct and adjust and, tear things down and rebuild them again, things like that. It's very different than like the old way of you kind of just, you try to plan the whole project from the very, very beginning, and then it's like 3, 4, 5 months in, you're like, oh crap, we're doing the wrong thing, but it's like so expensive to go back to the beginning. So I like that. I was like, that maybe when you were saying that, it's like, oh, exactly what you do in a lot of software teams
like
these
days.
days.
It's a psychological thing too. Like, if you kind of go down a certain, what's the word? I don't know. It's like you see people who are like, they have like they don't want to face what their real issue is, so they make up another issue, right? And then they, or it could even be they just misperceive it too. I mean, that
There is one other thing that doing that sort of teardown constantly always does, and it forces you to realize that whatever you're building is not holy. Like, there are no sacred cows with this thing.
Yeah.
And it's okay to throw it in the trash can because it is trash.
Yeah.
It is inherently material.
Right.
Cows, by the way, are the silent jury in the trial of mankind.
Okay.
It's a Facebook page.
Thanks.
It's called that, and that's what other.
All right.
Anyway.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I figured it would get edited out, so.
Yeah.
No, we're leaving
We're
it.
leaving that in there. You said that.
It's gonna be the title of this
That was this
Yeah.
episode.
Cows are the silent jury.
Watch the whole thing to figure out why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, reminds me of another cool aphorism. It comes from aeronautical engineering, but it's in here anyways. Perfection in design is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, rather than when there is nothing more to take away.
Yeah.
Which almost strikes back to the numinous bit.
Yeah.
Where, like, we want, like, good tools actually strip back and reveal.
That almost sounds
fruits.
hella Eastern, like the Eastern Church. Kind of that way of thinking. Like, it seems more, like, I don't know, the West.
Well, we
sounds
say
like
way
more-
too many words for that to be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brevity is the soul of wit. You won't find that, I guess.
Not with John Chrysostom.
No.
So it's more almost like you're digging for a thing. Where it's like okay.
You're refining a thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
So it's as
yeah.
if the thing exists already, but you are.
That's how people describe like making statues and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's how I've described.
They're
Like,
revealing the statue that was already in the marble.
You're removing everything that wasn't the statue.
That it wasn't
Yeah.
a statue, yeah.
yeah. Yes.
I often joke with people that machining is just archaeology.
Yeah.
Somewhere inside this block of aluminum, there's the part.
Well, it's like I always say, everything is everything. Archaeology, psych, philosophy, engineering, science,
Life is a mixture of
epidemiology.
everything,
Everything
yeah.
is everything. I mean, but that's how I view like songwriting, like
I do too,
poetry.
yeah.
So yeah, when I like write a song or a poem, like that word, even if I hadn't chosen it, it just would have been the ideally. It's as if it would have been meant to be. Like when you listen to a song and you hear something, you're like, if that wasn't there, I would have heard it anyway.
Right, it's
Those
like,
are the kind of things that the good songwriter tries to find and bring into the song.
this is great because a lot of songwriters also refer to, even those who aren't religious and whatnot, refer to like their muse. That's
Yes,
kind of
and-
along the same
Yes.
lines.
How
Yeah.
I see it is the character of the song. My style is second to the character of the song pretty much 90% of the time.
Yeah.
My style is irrelevant. It's what the song is. It's the character, and I'm actually finding it and then realizing it, manifesting it.
This is a fun lead-in into probably what our next topic is going to be.
Yeah.
this is-
So next time, we're going to be looking at a little bit about transhumanism, the technium, kind of like the machine, the whole...
The Ubermensch.
The Ubermensch, the Matrix. We're going to be looking at...
Are we living in a simulation?
Yes!
Yes.
Is Elon Musk's
You're supposed to say no.
Neuralink... Is Neuralink the future? And are we all going to be wearing VR goggles in the metaverse, man? So that's what we're going to be looking at next time on Machinae Ex Deo.